Choosing your own tarot deck can be overwhelming, and there are so many options out there. Last year I reviewed a lot of decks, and after going through all of them, I picked my top 5 decks of 2024, and in this video I'll walk you through what makes these decks stand out, how I select them, and why they might be the perfect fit for your practice. And if you stick around until the end, I will also show you a deck that almost made the cut but didn't quite make it. Hello and welcome back. This is Jay with Lunar Tarot, where I do weekly tarot and oracle decks review. This year I reviewed about 13 or 14 decks, and I'll be sharing my top 5 based on the certain criteria. I'm looking for visually appealing artwork on my decks. I'm looking for strong storytelling and archetype, either reimagined or its own unique. And I'm also looking at the high quality production. And this video isn't going to be a full review, but I will link the full review videos so you can go and have a look at the full deck and figure out if this is the deck that you want for yourself. Our first deck is the Tarot of the Divine, and this is a book created by Yoshi Yoshitani and published by Clarkson Porter, which is also, I believe, the publisher of the Penguin series books. It's a full 78 card deck, and it's quite a unique deck. I would call it a Disney deck. It's basically a deck that uses a traditional tarot architecture to introduce stories from different mythologies and fairy tales from all around the world. And the deck itself is quite nice. I would say that it's the quality is very well done. The cards themselves have this cool texture on the back of them, and the stories that I have seen in these are quite unique. I've met some characters that I've never heard of before, and I also have seen a few characters that I'm quite familiar with. Of course, the cards are not order, but you can just get an idea what it looks like. So each of these stories will have a description in the book, and Yoshi also published a companion book that expands on each one of the stories, because obviously looking at just interpretation of, let's say, Ace of Coins, there's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. And if you're not familiar with the story, it just gives you enough information to infer a meaning from it. But if you really want to explore it further, you probably want to get the companion book. So it's a unique perspective on tarot because it goes into a cultural exploration, and you can connect with archetypes from very different cultures. It also perfect, I would say, deck for someone who loves storytelling and loves to know the history behind some of his characters and maybe connect to them on a different level. I think this deck is suitable as a second deck for someone who already knows the basic tarot, because it will expand on their knowledge, but also it wouldn't be too difficult to figure out, meaning some of his cards by looking at the deck itself. If you like fairy tales and you like mythology, this could be an amazing deck for you. I think it's also a good deck for intuitive readings, because if you look at this one, you can figure out what's going on here, like a King of Swords. Maybe not always, but looking at Queen of Swords, you can infer a meaning if someone is quite powerful and also holding a sword in their hand, representing the thinking and communication. And also, I think a deck that could be good for creative reading if you need an inspiration for something. So this is what I think is the deck is for. And now some of my favorite cards that I can show you that are not listed on the box itself is the Devil card. That is from Brazilian mythology, a character called Boitata. This is actually a story that I'm very familiar with. It's a story of Alyonushka and brother Ivanushka from memory, and you can hear that this is it's from Russian fairy tale folklore, and this is of course the star, and it's a good illustration of intuitive reading. You can figure out this is a card about hope, and this one I quite like. This is Ace of Swords, representing the Gorgy of North, I think. It's the story of Alexander the Great when he was um, conquering empires, and this card symbolizes cutting through complicated issues with clear thinking and thoughts. My next favorite pick is the deck published by Los Scarabeo, and if you haven't seen some of my videos, I cannot praise them enough for the quality, the artistic quality, and this is what I expect Italian craftsmanship to look like. So this deck is called Astral Tarot, and it's in a nutshell, it's a reimagining of traditional tarot way deck with some ideas inspired by idea of astral plane and representation of a material world in a more spiritual realm. The deck itself uses traditional Rider-Waite type of deck architecture, so you wouldn't be totally surprised when you see this card deck. The quality is amazing. You get the gold gilded covers of the edges here, and it looks amazing. And also the deck itself, I'm not sure what they use, what type of material, but it's really glossy, and when you shuffle the deck, and I've used it a few times, there's like a layer of air between the cards, and they feel really, I don't want to say like airy in your hands, because they slide between each other quite well. You can see it here. It's almost like magical wave here. So this deck is, I would say, perfect for your first deck, and it will be a luxury introduction to the world of tarot, I would say. It also could be your second deck, and I think this is a deck that plays really well with intuitive reading. If you like Los Scarabeo, this is amazing, I would say. It also a deck for someone who likes this visual, punchy looking tarot decks. Everything here just very loudly speaks with you, and it also, I think, really good for using uplifting or material based, so that's what the deck told me, type of readings, right? So, and if you want to see all of the cards in this deck, check out the full video. My next deck, I think this is now we're going into serious territory. If the previous decks, they sort of reimagined traditional tarot in a more festive way, this deck, my friend, is something that I think it's kind of taking it to the next level, right? It's the Medieval Feathers Tarot, and look at the gold print on the deck. This is published by Blue Angel Publishing, an Australian tarot deck publisher, and I think they should be making more decks because this is amazing. And this deck is inspiration. It's a reimagining of a whole bunch of traditional tarot decks going back to 15th and 16th century. It does a good job at combining some of its images, and it doesn't just do that. So this is all the decks they use for the inspiration, right? I don't know how many, 10 decks, right? There are some words. I think the Major Arcana uses words in French. They also introduce this nice element called feathers, and I'll show you in a second on the cards, that adds a different meaning to each card, right? This is a proper book. This is not a little white book, but it's actual book you can read with meanings. The quality, so this is like a matte waxy finish, feels amazing in your hands, and both the box and the book have a gold print on them. Now this is where it gets a little bit interesting. I mentioned this is not a deck for someone who is not familiar with tarot deck, and I'll tell you the reason why, though they did make it a little bit easier. So while Major Arcana is pretty much on par, though I remember I mentioned that this goes back to some of the traditional decks in the past. The Fortuity was one of the actually trump cards that was originally in the deck, but then the Tower was introduced later. So because of that, they included two cards, 16, and there's also La Consultante, I think, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, card that represents a current, right? But this is where it gets interesting. Look at this card here. So this is the Seven of Cups, and you see no any archetypal imaging here. So if you're using Marseille deck or any of the ones that do not have any image on PIB cards, you will know that these cards rely more on numerology than intuitive reading. And I would say that you probably want to be familiar with meanings of cards, because if you don't know what Seven of Cups means, you either have to use the book quite extensively, or you want to practice, with a deck like Rider-Waite until you memorize the meanings. They did make, and the chord cards, of course, have the people images here, and they did the job a little bit easier for us. Like for instance, if you look at this card here, and this is of course the Seven of Cups, you can see that they actually added a meaning. So it's not completely hardcore. So there's a bit of an element of making it slightly easy for someone who just getting into it. Also, the cards are meant to be used in upright and reverse order. So this is the deck. I would say this is probably a deck for someone who is a bit more experienced. Now, the quality, as I said, it's amazing. Like, look at the cards themselves. They actually covered with this waxy type of coating on top of them, right? And it makes them feel like this card is actually aged well. It's almost like, you're buying a bottle of wine that's been aged for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. Only this one feels like probably 500 years because of its inspiration from traditional decks, right? Also, the cards themselves are a little bit bigger, and this is what I imagine the card would look like when they were originally introduced, because of print presses weren't that efficient and modern as they are today. But also, a lot of these cards were probably painted, or most likely were painted by hand, especially if they've been handed over in some of the wealthy families from generation to generation. So this is the deck. I think also, before I move on to the next one, this is an extra layer of complexity they added to it. So feathers have different colors, and they add an extra meaning to each card. And it's sort of like using an oracle card companion. So adding an extra dimension to the meaning of card. And if you look for feathers, you find in the book that each one of these cards will have the feather meaning. For instance, this one here. So this is what the Queen of Cups, and that's the French names of the cards that I mentioned. So beautiful deck. If you ever were curious about this traditional decks, and you haven't seen one, or you don't want to buy all 10 of those classic decks, and not all of them have complete deck of cards, this is a cool one to add to your collection. But again, if you're a novice, probably not the best first deck, I would say. My next choice is the deck called Mythologica Phoenica. And this is one of the most viewed and commented deck on my channel. Also by Australian publisher called the Rockpool Tarot. And Australia, you're doing so well. I just hope these guys produce more tarot deck this year, because it's the work itself is amazing. Starting from the box, good quality, amazing production. Like, look at the quality of the box, and little touches here, like the silver print inside. They're just so nice. They also did not skip on the ribbon here, so you pull the book out, a proper book, not a little tiny little booklet, and of course the logo of Rockpool Publishing, based in Sydney, Australia. Really cool. So let me tell you about this deck a little bit and why it's so unique. So instead of reimagining traditional tarot decks, what they did, they used the architecture of 78 cards from a traditional deck, but they used a Finnish mythology to create its own story, which I think is just remarkable work. So this deck draws inspiration from something called Kalevala. From what I understand, it's a collection of different myths from Finnish mythology, and I would imagine these are well-known characters in Finnish folklore. So the deck itself done really amazing. Like, it's not just a random characters from different mythology, but they're cohesive. They if you look at the major arcana, there is a I'm not going to spoil it to you here. If you want to see the full review, have a look at the video there that I did But the major arcana uses the deck, the characters from the mythology, and it's got its own hero. Hero has got friends, and he goes on a conquest to get the equivalent of Wheel of Fortune. Now, every card here has its own unique character, and there is no repetition. Every character has a the backstory, and this deck, I think, is just an amazing artifact that sort of introduces the Finnish folklore culture to someone who is into reading tarot. Now, production quality is also amazing. I think that they've done a good job by using this silver gilded edges, right, and then the blue color, and it reminds me of what I think of Finland. You know, the land that that is cold. There's a lot of snow in the land. From what I understand, a lot of people know how to ski. It's a cold environment, but it's also an environment where magical beings live, right? So yeah, beautiful deck. Now, who this deck is for? I think this is the next level, right? This is something, if you look for another meaning beyond traditional Rider-Waite decks, this deck offers completely new system, and I think you need to be experienced to read this, and I'll tell you why. While you can do intuitive reading, I think these characters will be probably more familiar to someone who grew up with this, and I think it will take you time to immerse into this deck. And I think this deck, if you give it time, can become a really good friend of yours. I think it's a deck based on my work with it. I think it's focused on passionate pursuits and creative projects and deeply personal journeys, I would say. It's a good deck for self-exploration, and I think if you want tarot to guide you through big picture themes and simple everyday reading, that could be a deck for you, my friends. And by the way, this is one of the main characters of the deck, just showed up at the end of a review. And my next deck is equally popular. I think I didn't give it enough justice because it was one of the first reviews that I did on the channel, and frankly, I wasn't quite sure what I was looking for So this deck is another Australian publisher, as I mentioned. This was created by Lauren Aletta, and what I like about it, it's visually appealing. The color palette is very soft and it's not very punchy, it's understated, and it's creating this calming but very engaging aesthetic. And I'm actually excited, even though I've seen this deck so many times. I'm gonna every time I look at it, it's just such a work of craftsmanship. It takes your breath away the first time I look at it. And what I like about this deck, right? First of all, the quality, right? It's very subtle. It doesn't jump at you. The cards are they got this matte finish to them. You can see they almost no shine, even with light directed at it. Though there's enough shine in them. I mean, you got the gilded edges here. And this deck follows the Rider-Waite Smith, but it reinterprets archetypes in a modern, I would say, reliable way. Like, look at this one here, the Knight of Pentacles, right? You got this a guy wearing a wrinkly suit with bears with the mountains in the back, and the Maiden of Pentacles is another modern take, but it's more like a spiritual, I would say, take on it. The Emperor wearing a short sleeve shirt. I think this deck is very intuitive. So if you go into it and study it, I think it will serve you really well without memorizing the rigid meaning. And I think even a beginner could use this deck, though it probably will help if you get some prior experience. And I think this deck is really good for self-exploration and personal development as well, right? So I think it's probably a deck, I would say, better suited for reflection rather than just using for predictive readings. Yeah, so if you're interested in astrology and modern archetypes, because you're going to see some zodiac elements, not on all of the cards, but on some of them, if you are into spiritual personal development, or if you want to get a gift for someone who is into tarot. I think this thoughtful design, the quality production, and very unique take makes a great gift for someone who's into tarot. Now, before we wrap up, I have one more deck to show you. And while I did make a cut, I think it's another beautiful deck. It's sort of this inconspicuous character sitting in the back of a room, waiting for you to engage them, right? And I quite like what they've done here. I think this deck is an amazing value, just because the way it's done. It came with the thing I haven't seen before, a little altar for your card, so you can put the card and do one card reading if you wanted to. And it's a very modern deck. It's got these images, like a collages of psychedelic looking pictures, right? And it takes you on a trip. I remember reviewing this deck, and I just, all the way through, it just made me laugh and have a occasional chuckle just looking at some of the imagery. And some of it looks super cool. Some of it looks like I've been taken to, you know, the summer of love, the hippie time, people walking around with, you know, flowers in their hair. It's got this like a Beatles feel to it, and I don't know, I thought it was an amazing deck. And the reason why I didn't include it in this, I wanted to keep a number to 5, but also I think it's a very unusual deck. I can't really get my head around how I would use it. It's got some of the qualities of an older deck. You know, the cards are quite wide, but then the image is sometimes silly and funny, and I'm not quite sure where to put it, but it's definitely a unique deck. I think it's one of the kind. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got a few interesting decks coming up for review. Please check in, and I release these videos once a week. If you like my channel, please like and subscribe, and let me know if there is a deck that you're using right now, and actually what made your favorite list of decks of 2024, and if there is a deck that you want me to review in the future. I would love to hear it from you. And thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.